All right, you guys, let's
Taking them all back.
think of getting started here. I'm gonna do a short review of essentially last week. And, last week, we were approaching the burning bush story, where it was said that Moses turned to look at the burning bush, and God saw him turning. So the word turning is used twice there, and I made a big deal out of the turning. That so the experience of the burning bush was an internal thing rather than something that was sitting on the road, although it could have been both at the same time. And the turning was there, and the other thing is we were looking at Ea, Asher, Ea, and Ea, Asher, Ea is not a singularity. It's not a single thing. It leads to a single thing, but it's not a single thing. It's a process that one gets into. It's very much like the process we're going to be reading about today, which people call the dialectic. So what I'm claiming is that Ea, Asher, Ea is the completion of the dialectic. And the reason I picked the Plato here, let me tell you a little bit about this particular chapter in Plato, and Plato in general, and the Republic. The Republic is set up so that in the beginning of the whole dialogue, the people are looking for the idea of justice. Okay, they're looking for the idea of justice. And Socrates decides, well, what we should do is we should create something like a just city, and then we'll be able to have the instance. We'll have an idea has many, many instances of something. If we create the just city, then we'll be able to see the thing at large. Well, that doesn't turn out so good to make a just city, because people have various kinds of natures. And if you try and balance all of these natures, it's sort of impossible. But the important thing is in the steps of creating the just city, we have to create a leader for the just city. And this dialogue has to do with the creation of the leader of the just city. The leader is going to be called the philosopher. And the philosopher of the just city, in essence, has to ascend out of the thing that we're going to call a cave and reach the idea of the good and come back down with lots of structure for the city. Very, very much like Moses, who ascends the mountain. Okay, so Moses ascends the mountain and comes down with the 10 Commandments. So this is sort of a counterpart of that. Let me see if there's any other introductory things I wanted to say. Okay, so I'm going to read this thing myself here, and I'm going to pick out certain highlighted areas in this chapter, in this book 7. And at the end of the reading, or near the end of the reading, we'll get to the method of how, in fact, does the philosopher get to the good. Okay, this is method stuff. This is very important stuff. Method is not revealed by guys like Solomon, who I'm going to talk about, or guys like Moses. They don't reveal the method. Okay, you think, well, they prayed a lot or God touched them, sure. But there's also a method involved in being able to get out and get to the good. Okay, starting. Now then, I said, make an image of our nature in its education and want of education, likening it to a condition of the following kind. See human beings as though they were in an underground cave-like dwelling, with its entrance, a long one, open to the light across the whole width of the cave. They're in it from childhood, with their legs and necks in bonds, so that they are fixed, seeing only in front of them, unable because of the bonds to turn their heads all the way around. Their light is from a fire burning far above and behind them. Between the fire and the prisoners, there's a road above, along which we see a wall built like the partitions, puppet handlers set in front of the human beings over which they show the puppets. So this is, let me explain this image a little bit. Okay, so these are people that are chained only to look forward. Okay, they can only look forward. They can't look to see what is actually creating the images on the wall in front of them. Socrates is going to claim that we're all sort of in this situation. And the images that are in front of them are shadows that are cast by people who are behind the people who are chained and can't look forward. There's a fire there, which is the source of light, which we're going to claim is like the physical sun, actually. But these people are bringing these images back and forth on a little elevated area. And it's the people can't see that they're people doing this. They can only see the images. Now, the images are in Greek lore were the mathematicians and the poets. Okay, the mathematicians and the poets in Greek lore brought the images that create the culture that you live in. In our lore, it's the advertisers. Okay, so we would see the advertisers who are bringing us images. The advertisers, the educators, the people that raise our children, we're all getting all of these images. And what we would like to do is we'd like to get to see what's really cooking, what's really going on. So we'd like somehow to be able to turn our heads, again, turning, and this, by the way, in this book 7, there are 11 mentions of turning. So they're really into turning. It was only 2 mentions of turning and Moses turning to see the burning bush. Okay, so let's continue on the next highlighted thing. And then he says then most certainly, I said, such men would hold that the truth is nothing other than the shadow of artificial things. Now consider, I said, what their release and healing from bonds and folly would be like. If something of this sort were by nature to happen to them, take a man who is released and suddenly compelled to stand up, turn his neck around, walk, and look up towards the light. And if he compelled him to look at the light itself, would his eyes hurt? Would he flee, turning away to those things that he's able to make out and hold them to be really clearer than what is being shown? So the task here of the philosopher, or the person who wants to get out of the cave, or the person who wants to transcend the culture that they're in, is to somehow see what's really happening here, okay? And as they turn, and they look at the light is sort of blinding. The real light is sort of blinding. And because the real light is blinding, they don't want to look at it, okay? Most people are absolutely content looking at the shadows in the front of the cave wall. They don't want to look at the light, okay? By the way, stop me with any questions you have. And if you compel them to look at light, okay. And if, I said, someone dragged him away from there by force, along the rough, steep upward way, and didn't let go of him before he dragged him out to the light of the sun, wouldn't he be distressed and annoyed at being so dragged? And he came to the light, wouldn't he have his eyes full of its being and be unable to see even one of the things now said to be true? Okay, so and we see this. As a psychiatrist, I have seen this. I have seen people who have transcended the cave and gone towards the light of the good here. It's the light of the good here. The good is a lit notion in Greek. So they transcend the cave and they come back and they're really confused, okay? And they're really confused, and usually we put them in a mental hospital to help them with the confusion, all right? So it takes courage and strength and lots of other attributes that we were talking about in earlier classes to be able to do this job, to be able to ascend out of the cave. Nancy, you got a question?
I did have a question. Is the light good? The idea of good, right? That idealized good, or is the light truth?
It's both. Both, yeah, the light is both truth and good.
Okay.
Now, the light here, you got to understand that the Greeks had a very, very different conception of the divine than the Hebrews had. The Hebrews also had light, okay, they had God shining, the light of God shining his face in you, but the Hebrews had an agency within the light. There's some kind of agency given to the light. The Greeks don't have that. The light is almost a natural thing that has the truth about everything, the structure about everything, and flows towards everything in a positive way. But it doesn't have agency. It isn't something you can pray to in Greek law because it has no agency. It's like a fixture, more or less a fixture on the wall. It isn't like the Adonai that we think of.
But it reminded me when I read this at first, when I read the shorter version of like people who only watch one channel and people who only watch another channel, and they don't see anything else other than that particular point of view, or the Palestinians also, that they've been so taught to just believe this part and not look to find the truth.
Well, but
Yes,
this is happening to us too, okay? And it's happening to different degrees, and it's happening actually, they will point out, it's happening through our education, okay? We're educated to see things in a particular way.
Right.
The word educare, which is the basic Latin word for education, does not mean to put stuff into you to be able to able to see things. It means to lead out. It means to lead out. So what we're hoping here is that we'll be led out of the so-called tables and chairs that we sat at in kindergarten and be able to see more of the truth. Now,
Educare.
okay,
I just want to point out, they're actually talking about two lights here, right? So one is the natural light outside the cave,
right,
and the other is the artificial light.
right,
Fire created by the people who are trying to show images, and those are where the images come from. They don't come from the natural light per se. It's the images on the wall are from the artificial light.
that's correct. That's correct. That's good. Okay, what then, when he recalled his first home? This is the guy that's taken off a little bit. He's outside there. Says, what then when he recalled his first home and the wisdom there and his fellow prisoners in that time? Don't you suppose he'd consider himself happy for the change and pity the others? He's gotten used to the divine light. He's gotten used to the light of the good. And he looks and he sees all of these people paying attention to images, and he's feeling sort of pretty good about himself, that he's sort of perked out of the thing and he's on to the real truth. And if at that time there were among them any honors, this is very important. And if at that time there were among them, the people who were still in the cave, among them any honors, praises, and prizes for the man who is sharpest at making out things that go by, and most remembers which of them are accustomed to pass before, which after, and which at the same time as others, and who is thereby able most to divine what is going to come. In your opinion, would he be desirous of them and envy those who are honored and hold power over these men? Or would be affected, as Homer said, and he'd want to live a much simpler life? Now, this is very interesting too. King Solomon in Ecclesiastes, which is a work that we did a couple of years ago, has also this particular view that what's cooking in the cave, he says, is vanity of vanities or smoke. He says it's just nothing, okay? So King Solomon has this view also. In fact, in King Solomon's system, if you read that carefully, there are 29 times that King Solomon mentions the word tachat hashemesh, means under the sun, okay? So he's talking about that nothing happens that's real. Nothing happens that we should take pride in. Nothing happens in any way under the sun. And if you read that, it's a very sort of negative view of our day-to-day lives, King Solomon's view. So he's saying he says it's nothing under the sun. Okay, But Solomon is not about to reveal how to get above the sun, which is what these guys are into. Okay, they want to get above the sun. They want a philosopher or somebody who's ready for it to be able to pop out of the cave and get to the light of the good and bring down into this just city that they're forming. They want all the structure that lies in the light of the good, all the forms that are there in their purest possible form. Solomon is just lamenting the fact that there's nothing that happens in the cave that has any power to stand the test of time. Okay,
But Solomon, we assume, is already sort of ascended and had all these experiences. Why wouldn't he want to pass that down to the rest of the people?
well, not in
his
that
people.
story, not, yeah, right, not in that story. Not in that story does he pass that down. Plato is very interested in passing the method down for how we transcend the cave, how we turn our heads around and pop out of this thing and are able to bear the light of the good without going crazy, okay? So in fact, he's going to have the philosopher going up and down a lot. And by the way, Socrates made a lot of trips that way for sure. And Socrates was said to have total mastery of all of the realms, okay? So when Socrates, and before the dialogue, the symposium, Socrates spends 12 hours meditating, 12 hours, okay, sitting outside, and he's following the sun somehow as it's shining into him. And then he comes and they start the symposium because Socrates is ready. He's gotten out of there. He's gotten his lines. He's gotten whatever he has to do. But Socrates also, when it comes to day-to-day life, when he meets somebody on the street, he says, "Oh, you're Theaetetus. Your father is in this kind of a business." He absolutely was able to move back and forth, out and in, without breaking a step. Okay, so and I think Moses was too, by the way. Okay, so Moses in the Shavuot, in the Parsha around Shavuot, ascends and descends this mountain 11 times, by the way, okay? And Moses is doing the same kind of thing, the ascending and descending, as we're going to learn the philosopher does here.
It's like he had a task and he just stuck to that task.
Well, sure.
So, okay, so let me start. So in my experience, the grand majority of people don't want to be taken out of their comfort.
No,
No.
So they
No.
don't want,
they don't want to.
they don't
want
want
to
to
stay in the
Stay in the cave.
They don't want,
cave.
and they actually don't want somebody to see the light and then bring
No,
them
of course not,
information
of course
about the
not.
light.
If-
And so a little bit, just following this paragraph, so I do have a question on this paragraph, so I'm reading the one you just read and it says, okay, so I'm following it and there's honor and praises for all the people who don't see the light, but can remember the shadows that are passing in front of them and, and they get all the accolades in society. And then you have someone who steps outside the norm to search beyond, that sort of thing. I understand that the end of it's kind of asking, does that person really want all those honors and accolades? I would say normally no, because they're beyond that. But there's something in here that
Well, more at
and I
the
can't
end
remember
of
what it
that.
was, but those are my thoughts on it. That's really kind of what that paragraph is saying. right?
Okay, at the end of that paragraph, they say, and if they were somehow able to get their hands on and kill the man who attempts to release and lead them up, wouldn't they kill him? Okay, so people are unhappy. And you can imagine that the people who run the government, the businesses, etc. That's why Socrates was killed, by the way, by his city.
Well,
Because he was teaching this method and hanging around him, learning this method, were the
The youth
sons
of
of
Athens.
all of the famous people in the city.
Right.
And the father had, say, a horse farm. The son's supposed to go into that business. Well, the son, after feeling some of these things, does not want to go into the business of the horse farm. He wants to hang around, talk to Socrates, and dwell in the celestial realm.
Well, quote the
Corrupted.
Indigo Girls, Galileo's head was on the block for looking at the truth.
Sure, sure,
And so was Socrates.
sure, right.
Corrupted
Okay,
the
well-
youth of Athens.
Well, then, my dear Lycon, I said, this image as a whole must be connected with what was said before. Liken the domain revealed through sight to the prison home, and the light in the fire, and the light of the fire in it to the sun's power that we see. And applying the going up and the seeing of what's above to the soul's journey up to the intelligible place. You'll not mistake my expectation, so you desire to hear it. So a lot of this, by the way, a lot of this dialogue is somewhat repetitive, but really worth listening to, really worth reading on your own and being taken over by it and thinking it through, because the method is in the dialogue. Okay, the method is in the reading of this. Okay, now it hasn't gotten complicated. The method is somewhat difficult, but it can be mastered. Okay, then if this is true, I said, we must hold the following about these things. Education is not what the professions of certain men assert it to be. They presumably assert that they put into the soul knowledge that isn't in it, as though they were putting sight into blind's eye. Yes, he said they do indeed assert that. But the present argument, on the other hand, I said, that's Socrates talking, indicates that this power is in the soul of each, in the soul of each. And that the instrument with which each learns, just as an eye is not able to turn towards the light from the dark without the whole body, the soul must be turned around from that which is coming into being together with the whole soul until it is able to endure at that which is, and the brightest part of what is. And we affirm that this is the good, don't we? So the brightest part, he's making a distinction between what's called being and becoming. Okay, the cave life is becoming. Okay, that's where all of the action is. That's where all our human discourse is. That's where we make money, lose money, gamble, chase women. You know, lots of good stuff happens in the cave. But being is something that doesn't move like that. Okay, this is what Solomon would call above the sun. Everything below the sun, he feels is nothing, Solomon. And everything above the sun, he doesn't mention above the sun, but he mentions below the sun 29 times in that dialogue. Says Tachat Hashemesh. Every time he talks about something that's useless in the human world, he says Tachat Hashemesh. He's making, you know, for people who think about this, why is he using Tachat Hashemesh, below the sun, so many
So
times?
there must be an above the sun.
Right, there
Yeah,
must be
there
an
has to
above
be
the
with
sun.
that.
Anyway, this is where he wants us to head.
Can I just assert something? I understand exactly what you're saying. I personally would, and I know this is what he's saying, being and becoming. But I personally would flip the words, that being in the cave is just being, because you are not.
Existing,
I
You are
agree. I
existing.
agree with
And
that.
that becoming
Agreed.
is growing
Yes.
and reaching for the light
Okay,
and
right.
understanding. But I understand this, that this is.
Yeah,
his,
this
you
is,
know,
this
his
is the,
set of words,
yeah,
but
this
I
is
would
the
reverse it.
distinction that the Greeks had
Yeah,
between being and
right,
becoming.
yeah.
But you're
But I
right,
think
and
it
you can
makes
turn it
sense,
around and
yeah.
make
That's
it, make,
exactly
and
what you're
change the
saying.
values
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Okay. There would, therefore, I said, be an art of this turning around, an art of this turning around concerning the way in which this power can most easily and efficiently be turned around. Not an art of producing sight in it. Rather, this art takes as given that sight is there, but not rightly turns nor looking at what it ought to look at and accomplishes the object. And it says, so it seems. Okay, so there in all of us is this light of the good. Okay, and if you think about it, by the way, as light of the good rather than the light of God, I think it's easier to deal with it if it's the light of the good rather than it has to do with getting close to God. Now, why that is because of all the training we've had as to what God means and all this stuff, etc. Now, this path that we're taking here is very different from, there's two ways of dealing with it. There's two ways of dealing with getting to the light of the good. One is the pious way. Okay, I'm not a pious person, so I'm not dealing with it that way. When you get to the light, you bow down, you pray, and you say to God, what can I do for you? How can I please you? That's what a pious man does. The philosopher, which they're training here, says, wow, what a blast. That's really worth pursuing. Let's go for it. Let's
That's your
see.
philosophy.
Yeah, but if you think about it as God, if you think about this light thing as having agency, that it could kill you, that it could crush you, that it could step on you, what happens is you might be more fearful of it. So it's better in this situation to think about this as the light of the good rather than the God's light. Okay. So there's an art of turning around. The next thing, then, okay, so then they're going to talk about they're still founding the city, and they want the philosophers to be able to take this path, to go up to the light of the good, to find there the structure of the forms in Plato's notion. There are these forms, they're not of material things. There are these forms, and they'd like the philosopher who's going to run the city to have in his head these particular forms, so that when he makes judgments in the city, he'll do it according to these forms. They're very much like Moses, for example. Moses goes up the mountain, and God gives him, in the Hebrew tradition, he doesn't, the forms are in the form of 10 dictates, okay? And then he comes down, and what he's going to do with this is he's going to also create a just city by using these things. Very similar stuff, which is very important to realize, that the Jews weren't alone in this, but there's a radical renaming of the light of the good to the light of God, okay? And you can have it any way you want, actually. Then our job as founders is to compel the best natures to go to the study, which we were saying before is the greatest, to see the good, to go up that ascent, and when they have gone up, seen sufficiently, not to permit them now, which is now permitted. Well, the thing is the philosophers have to go up, but they also have to come down. You got to be sure. When you send a guy on a trip like that, and he gets the light of the good, and he's dwelling in this ecstatic feeling of the light of good, he doesn't want to come down. He just wants to hang around there. But the Greeks have trained these philosophers at the expense of the city. The expense of the city. They've been educated at the expense of the city. So when they go up, they've got to come down, because they've got to bring their insights that they got into the city to be able to form the just city. Otherwise, by the way, if they don't come down, they're killed. Okay. Nobody wants to come down. None of these philosophers actually want to come down, and they don't want to come down, and they want to dwell in the celestial realm. And if they don't come down, bad things happen to them. And the idea is they have to be able to rule. Now, they're not going to want to rule the people who are looking at the shadows, right? They're not going to want to get into politics. Why would they want to get into politics when they're seeing the real thing up close? Okay. But they're forced to do that. That's really the
Well, they
design.
thought that they have a responsibility to the rest of it.
Yeah, but you can forget about your responsibility once you have sort of, once you're close to the light of the good. Okay, you're reading on. So you must go down, each in his turn, into the common dwelling of the others, and get habituated along with them to see the dark things. And in getting habituated to it, you will see 10,000 times better than the men there. And you'll know what each of the phantoms is, and what it is a phantom, and of what it is a phantom, because you've seen the truth about the fair, the just, and the good things. And thus the city will be governed by us and by you in a state of waking, not in a dream, as many cities nowadays are governed by men who fight over shadows with one another and form factions for the sake of ruling, as though it were some great good. But the truth is surely this: the city in which those who are going to rule are least eager to rule is necessarily governed in the way that is best and freest from faction, while the one that gets the opposite kind of rulers is governed in the opposed way. So the rulers here are not interested in ruling. They're not like people who run for office. These are people who run away from office, okay? They're not like, and the Greeks end up having a certain hierarchy of this. The highest city, in their opinion, is ruled by philosophers, people who don't want to rule. The next level is what they call a timocracy. Timocracy is ruled by people who are filled with pride in the ruling, the lust for power in the ruling. The next one is what they call an oligarchy. An oligarchy is run by people who have cash and generate cash for themselves. And the lowest thing, the absolute lowest thing, is a democracy, ruled by the mob. That's what we have apparently now. That's called a democracy. Okay. Have you, I said, any other life that despises political offices other than that of true philosophy? And he says, no, by Zeus, he said, I don't. Okay. Going on. What else were you compelled to do? Who else were you compelled to do the guarding of the city than the men who are most prudent in those things through which a city is being governed, and who have other honors and a better life than the physical life, the political life? Other honors means that they're up in the celestial realm, okay? So they're not getting off, they're not getting a kick, they're not getting anything from ruling. In fact, it's purely a burden for them. No one else is it. Do you want us now to consider in what way such men will come into being, and how one will lead them up to the light, just as some men are said to have gone from Hades up to the gods? And he responds, how could I not want to check this out? Then, as it seems, this wouldn't be the twirling of a shell, but the turning of a soul around from a day that is like night to the true day. It is that ascent to what is, what you would say, it's the becoming of that. It's that ascent to what is, which we shall truly affirm to be philosophy, most certainly. Then mustn't we consider what studies have such power? The studies thing, we're not going to go into detail of this, because this is, there's lots of twists and ironies about what studies are necessary. But the biggest study that's necessary is gymnastics in the beginning. Why gymnastics? Because gymnastics is a grounding study. It grounds you. Okay, so when you get up to the light, you're going to still be interested in bodily things. You're not just going to be sitting and coasting completely. So gymnastics is a key thing, but gymnastics isn't going to necessarily do it. Let's see if what I
Can I just ask a question? So you said they have these ideas of levels of governing cities, but I find it hard to believe that true philosophers, people who truly have sought the light, would be able to successfully govern, because I think the grand majority of people would revolt against that.
well, they're killed if they don't. That's that you take the philosophy.
And the people who are philosophers, because I find that very few people, and one thing I like about this class, by the way, is this is a class of people who truly are searching and seeking. It's a very difficult thing to find, I think, people who really question and study. But, and so it's few and far between. There are a lot of people who call themselves things like philosophers and that sort of thing, but they just have the trappings thereof. And so I would, in my mind, just based on my experience and my little life here, I would say that if there were cities in Greece that were ruled by philosophers, some of them were pseudo philosophers instead of true philosophers. I would just submit that.
There probably were
For all
no
those
cities
there were
at
no
all
cities, there were no
who were
such
ruled
cities.
by philosophers in Greece. So this is a literary work, okay,
Right.
to create such a city.
Right.
And even in the literary work of creating such a city that has this perfect justice, they can't do it. We're gonna find that they can't do it. We're not gonna touch that, but the reason they can't do it is because people have too many natures. Okay, there are too many differences among people to set up a system of justice that satisfies a perfect system of justice. So this is sort of a bit of irony.
So this is
Okay.
like a theoretical utopia.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
for
yeah.
sure, for sure.
Plato's Republic,
This is
the ideal
yeah.
society.
And- Yeah, right.
And usually this involved to the spies that were sent out, you know, in the parsha that were in the week,
Right.
this week.
Joshua Caleb.
Yeah, because, you know, there were 10 spies that were sent out, or 12 actually. And only 2 of them came back with positive you know, observations. At least in their mind, and what they saw, whereas the other 10 said, no, can't do it, you know. And Rabbi Middleman made a comment that basically the reason was that the 10 couldn't is because they
They're in the
were
cave.
too involved with their own personal you know, needs or desires, that they couldn't see what was there
potential.
would benefit
Yeah.
them.
Right,
They're
right.
stuck in a
It's
cave.
it's a very similar thing. So, you know, the place that they're going to see is the land of milk and honey. It's also partially a celestial realm, and they go there and they come back
don't
and they
see
say,
it.
no, we don't want to go there. You know, so what we're gonna do is maybe lie a little bit. We're gonna say that the people there are really big and strong and powerful and they could kill us. We just want to keep what we have and we don't want to put ourselves in danger. You're right. It's very similar. Okay, and yet what other study? So he's looking at studies that are separate from music, gymnastics, and the arts. He says, come then, I said, if we have nothing left to take besides these, let's take something that applies to them all. Okay, and what he starts, what applies to them all is calculation. So numbers, using numbers properly. And I'm gonna go into one little piece of this, but this is where the dialectical work that one has to do comes in this dialogue. Says the lowly business, I said, of distinguishing the 1, the 2, and the 3. I mean by this succinctly numbers and calculation. Or isn't it the case with them that every kind of art and knowledge is compelled to participate in it? Okay, now, the thing that he wants, and I'm gonna summarize this, the thing that he wants through numbers is, for example, he looks at a hand, this is exactly the example he uses. He looks at a hand and he says, this particular finger, is it bigger or smaller? Is it a big finger or a small finger? And
Compared to what?
all of a sudden that's puzzling, right? Because it's bigger than this one, but it's smaller than this one. And yet it still is a singular 1 finger, okay? So he's trying to aim us in our thinking to go after things where the sensory aspect of the thing can't define it perfectly, okay? So he wants us to play with so this finger is both bigger and small, right? It's bigger than this one and it's smaller than this one. Now, what is the relationship between big and small, etc.? This is the one example that he uses. There are many types of examples, but if you can find something like this where the sensory knowledge of the thing still leaves you puzzled, okay? You want to be puzzled. Puzzled is very important because puzzled, he will claim, excites the intellect. Being puzzled
That's so
excites
true.
the intellect. Looking at things that are the way they are, like these glasses, etc., or this guy sitting over there, you know, you want something that excites curiosity and excites the intellect
You want to
because
look for distinctions.
in exciting the intellect will lead to dialectical thought. It'll lead to dialectical thought. Dialectical thought is very important for this whole process. In fact, it might have been the
Process
Greeks
is.
that actually invented, that called this by its name. Dialectical thought is seeing through things. Seeing through things to what? what do you get to when you see through things?
Their
Well,
truth, their
Well,
light.
sure, there's
their
light,
good.
right? What you get to is an unknown area where where things are what they are and they're not what they are. You get to sort of a puzzlement. You get to a place where there's an inherent contradiction. And with an inherent contradiction, most people are repelled by that. Okay, they're repelled by an inherent contradiction and so they pull back from it. But if you persist, if you sort of turn it around in your head and try to think, well, what's the problem with this? It seems like there's a paradox here. This finger is both bigger and smaller. How does that work? It's one finger, and yet it participates in two attributes that are the opposite of each other. Isn't that strange? Okay, so if you get into really reading this heavily, I mean, reading it and focusing on it and getting it to and reading it to the point that you understand it, you might pop out of here and yeah, you may lose your job if you do this, yeah.
One can only hope.
But maybe some people, I was just thinking, only look at it as bigger or smaller. They don't like see that it could be either one, David.
Okay, they can do that too.
Yeah.
But it has to be either bigger or smaller, doesn't it? It
Yeah,
has to be
I
either
know,
big or
right.
small, maybe.
Unless you're living on Earth too, in which case
Yeah.
it can be whatever fantasy
They
you
want.
desire, but you're still back in the cave.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's thought like this. It's thought like this that springs you loose from it. Okay, this is sort of dialectical thought.
Yeah, this question.
Okay, it is probably one of those things we were seeking that by nature. This is the thing I'm talking about. By nature leads to intellection. But no one uses it rightly as a thing that in every way is apt to draw men towards being.
So
the
it's the
delight of being.
so it's the dialectic process that that draws men toward being. Is
That's
that what
right.
you're saying?
It's the dialectic process. It's, for example, the same thing as thinking about Ea Asher Ea. Okay, thinking about that, really puzzled about this. That here you have, let's make it into the present because it's just easier to think about. I am and I am. You have two I ams, right? And are not these things sides of the dialectic? And is not the thing that we're looking for where the dialectic fuses, where the two things fuse? We don't want to think of God being split, right? We don't want to think of a dualism in the heart of the divinity. So we want to be able to unite the dualisms. As you unite the dualisms into the Asher, into the thing in the middle, Ea, Asher, Ea. The Asher is sort of that or whatever it is. As you unite them in your mind and you fiddle with this in your mind, you're taking two things here, Ea, another Ea, unite them in your mind, and something magical may happen to you. Abu Fia, a guy named Abu Fia, he was hanging around the Middle Ages. He used to permute the names of God. He would permute the name of God, the Yod He Vav He, and he would turn them around. This is a 4-letter thing, and just as an aside, the ascending, the business of ascending, that's what we're talking about. We're using the dialectic to ascend. Maimonides takes up ascending in a deep way, okay, in the Guide for the Perplexed. In chapter 15 of book 1, he says that all ascending, all ascensions, it's done with a ladder. Okay, so if you're going to ascend to the heavens,
You're
Mm-hmm.
not flying.
you're going to need a ladder.
Physically,
You're
yeah.
going to need a ladder, right? And then in book 2, in chapter 33, he tells you what the ladder is. The ladder is made up of 4 angels, 2 ascending and 2 descending on the same rung of the ladder. And you think, what is this? 4 angels. Well, the revealing, and that is a dialectical process for sure. You got 2 ascending, 2 descending, they're on the same rung of the ladder. And if you want to get up the way Jacob got up using the ladder, then you have to be able to think like that. Okay, Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed reveals everything, but he reveals everything in a way that You have to study it for a long time because it's all in pieces, okay? He's not supposed to reveal this stuff. In the Sefer Haggadah and lots of other places, it says you gotta keep this stuff secret, okay? And he says he's afraid that if he doesn't reveal all of this stuff, and his method in the guide is strictly dialectical. Okay, and so you follow this, you're learning the dialectic, because he's separating things, putting them together, separating things, putting them together all the time. Anyway, he is trying to reveal things, but keep it only for the people who can, I'm not sure, but he says the people who can listen. And for the people who can really listen. So he reveals things, but he reveals a piece in chapter this, a piece in chapter this, and you gotta put the whole thing together. It's a work that takes many, many years, for sure. And I can't say that I got the whole thing. I got a piece of it, which is fine. Okay. Let's go on here. He says, and he also talks about hard and soft instead of big and little. He says, isn't it necessary, I said, that in such cases the soul would be a loss at the what this sensation indicates by the hard, if it's said that the same thing is also soft. Okay, this is another example that he's using hard and soft rather than big and little. And what the sensation of the light and the heavy indicates by the light and the heavy. If it indicates that heavy is light and light heavy. Okay, so again, perplexity in this. He's talking about something that's both hard and soft, something that's both big and little, opposites. The opposites are very, very important because it's in the opposites that the dialectical ascent takes place, and it's somehow the opposites come together. By the way, it's said in lots of different places that the only person who can tolerate opposites coexisting at the same time is the divinity. Okay? The divinity tolerates opposites coexisting. For us mere humans, we don't tolerate that. But this, we can't take that seriously because Plato's teaching that, Maimonides teaching that. So on the one hand, even though these things are supposedly hidden and attributed only to God and not to man, we can't take that seriously, otherwise we're stuck in the cave forever. Okay.
No.
Well then, this was what I was trying to convey in saying that some things are apt to summon thought, while others are not. Defining as apt to summon, it's those that strike the sense at the same time as their opposites, while all those who do not summon thought are not apt to arouse intellection. So when you get to a place that has two opposites connected to it, that's a good spot. And it's confusing, right? Now, confusing is also a word for dizziness, right? And dizziness has to do with turning. And the soul begins to turn. Okay, I think I mentioned this last time. As young children, as we're sitting in the cave as young children, we notice that the light of the good that we were born with is now going out because of all the teaching. So what kids do is they turn themselves in a circle, they spin themselves around, some kids do, until they fall to the ground laughing. So they've broken out of the thing. As adults, if you do that, you're going to be arrested, okay, and put into a mental hospital. So you don't want to do that. But what you want to do is make yourself a little bit dizzy through thinking. And again, who wants to do that to themselves? Not everybody. Okay, so that's the problem that you're talking about. There are lots of problems on the way of being able to work on yourself like that. Okay.
I would also say that, and because I encounter this a lot in talking to people that by and large, what you're saying about, opposites, a lot of people make mutual exclusives. They'll say, well, it's either this or either that. And often things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Both can be true at the same time. It's just how they fit together.
Well, it depends what kind of opposites you pick. For example, if you pick motion and stillness are opposites, right? This is moving, this is still. They can't both be true at the same time.
Yes, they can.
Can they?
Yeah.
Well,
because
okay,
it can
if
be
you,
still,
and
but
you
the
could
earth
be
is
relative
moving,
to something,
but
right?
the earth is moving,
Right,
right?
right.
Inertia.
Okay, but, okay, let me think of another opposite. What about being and nothingness? Can be, both being and nothingness be true at the same time?
Doesn't nothingness
Well, this-
exist?
Well, okay, but okay, so now we're, okay,
Right.
now we're starting to have a dialogue.
Exactly.
Now we're
It's the
starting to have a
intellectual
dialogue.
spinning.
Right,
Yeah,
that's the,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
the intellectual
Yeah.
process. We have a dialogue. And remember, I told you that the front of the head was called dianoia, also die. So a dialogue, and actually in Greek does not mean two necessarily, it means seeing through. Okay, a dialogue is getting through a matter to something that is beyond the matter and somehow has the whole thing in it. Okay, so dialogue is very important, and if you find somebody that you can have a dialogue with, good luck to you, because you're off in the races. Then you can bounce off each other these particular ideas, and in bouncing off each other these particular ideas, it forces you to think. It forces you to use your intellection, and intellection is the whole key here. And
Intellections in November, right?
intellection is what? Intellection is in November. That's right. That's coming up. Okay.
To the point about the, the mutual exclusivity and whether being and nothingness exists. And also, when Bonnie was mentioning about making distinctions, and we have what is purported to be a dialogue that will take place tonight, which is the antithesis of a dialogue. And the goal is to end all dialogue,
Right,
right?
right.
And somebody should actually die as a result of the dialogue.
No. You don't have to have somebody die. What happens is you end it.
Politically speaking,
Well,
Politically
no, but
speaking.
we're, yeah, politically
that
speaking
is,
is, yeah.
the goal.
In the
is
cave,
dialogue.
in the cave, they don't want dialogue. Of course, they want extremes on one side or the other, or just one side or the other. So they don't want to say something is A. They want to say something is A or something is B, right? And A and B are opposites of each other. We're defining them as opposites. That's cave stuff. And that thinking comes from using
I
sensation,
want to
not
ask your opinion
intellection.
about that, though, in relation to the story of the Garden of Eden. So you could almost say that Adam and Eve are in the cave. But it's not quite
No.
It's not quite
They're
that
in the
simple, right?
light.
Because that story posits that all the information and all the ability, and all the introspection and intellection is all there. It's waiting on that tree. Right? Because as soon as they eat from it, God says they'll be like gods. The decision is not so much whether you can become that kind of thinking person. The decision is whether doing that is worth the consequence, which is banishment from, right? So,
Sure.
so it's a different, it seems to me it's a different view that says actually all of us can be that philosopher. Every one of us can be that particular.
So we're born like, originally, we had that ability, right? That's
Yeah,
what
it's
I'm saying.
just a matter of taking it
Well,
and
but-
then understanding that by taking it,
right,
you will give something else up. And so in this case, those people who are philosophers out in the sun, they may not want to go back down, right? But in this case, it's not that you don't go back down and say you're stuck.
right.
You can't go back down.
Right.
You have reached a.
Well, you do, in fact, you are back down. After you disobey, the act of disobeying the divinity, who tells you not to do something, takes courage, right?
Sure.
It takes a huge amount of courage. So that act.
Well, on the part of Adam. it took
Yeah,
ignorance.
sure.
Complete ignorance.
That act of disobedience, which took a lot of courage, was the beginning of something. and the beginning of something, but he gets tossed out of the good life. He gets tossed out of the celestial realm, and he has to, he has to eat from the ground and
But it gets tossed into the realm where they can have conversations
right,
like this.
right. So
Right,
it's sort of
so,
it's sort of a trade-off, if you
Right.
will, right? That's the Hebrew story, right?
But they were, I mean, essentially it was like a cave because the gates were locked for the garden.
No, they
No,
weren't.
they-
weren't.
Well,
Well, they were guarded by
Well,
they were
cherub on the way
guarded,
after they
It
break.
was a nice cave.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a really
A
good place.
celestial cave.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
On Earth.
So instead of being in the dark, you were in the light.
You were
but
in the light.
You were not necessarily.
Well, and this has to get, but this has
You're in
to
a
do
closed
with
box.
the major difference between the good of the Greeks and the God of the Hebrews. The good of the Greeks has no moral quality,
Right.
has no agency, no moral quality. It just is something that's inexplicable. The God of the Hebrews has, and that's the story of the Garden of Eden is a really interesting moral story. Because the Hebrews are raised to believe that if they disobey the rules, bad things are gonna happen to them. I mean, it's part of setting up, it's part of setting up the business of how we should live our lives, and they do it differently. The Hebrews and the Greeks do it quite differently. Okay, let's continue. We've got a couple of minutes here. Let's see if there's anything else that's worth mentioning here.
Just fill it.
Okay, so he's gonna go on to the four things that he's gonna fiddle with. One of them is he's got calculation, okay, the number thing he started with. And he's gonna go to the geometry. He wants to do geometry too. We're talking about training for the philosopher. So calculation, geometry. And then music and astronomy, where the thing gets very confusing in this dialogue as to what the order of these things are. But those four things, calculation, geometry, music, and astronomy, are called the quadrivium in medieval law. Okay, the trivium was grammar, rhetorics, and dialectic. Okay, so to start anything, you had to have the trivium. You had to have grammar, you have to know grammar, rhetorics, and dialectic. But to make the full trip up to the moon or where you're headed, you have to have the quadrivium. And this is where the quadrivium comes from, because the quadrivium is arithmetic, calculation and arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. And there's some interest in what music is. Okay, they put music probably as higher than the astronomy in one place and a little lower than the astronomy in another place, if you read it carefully. Okay, so yeah, music is a big key to this. And if you can understand how music somehow relate, and they're trying to relate number and counting, geometry, astronomy, and music, to try to relate it all with music, some sort of harmony.
But isn't there also an artistic, which means there's a sensation, there's a sensory aspect to music that is not part of the rational calculation, the rational geometry, and the
Of
rational
course.
astronomy, so.
But the idea is to get beyond the rational. The dialectic takes you beyond the rational and lets you still maintain your rationality when you're going beyond the rational. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get out of the rational, because it's getting out of the rational that takes us to the light of the good. Now, not crazily out of the rational, okay? Because we have a mortgage on our house, we've got a wife who needs pleasing one way or another. And, you know,
Yes.
and we've learned gymnastics for our body.
That's the marriage, right?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
May,
Yeah.
may I make a quick point in the minutes you have left? Because since at bottom, dialectic, which is interestingly never defined here, it comes down to conversation, trying to reach toward the truth, but it's a conversation. So I just wanted to say that when people have attempted to put philosophers or people they regarded as philosophers on top, it doesn't end well. And the other thing is Tachat Hashemesh, under the sun. It's commonly, it's in Kohelet, in Ecclesiastes, it's many times said. In the rest of the Tanakh, it's nowhere. And I was taught by a teacher that in the rest of the wisdom literature, Jewish and non-Jewish, it's all over the place. And it just means an expression for everything in the world. And it's very clever. I think, in fact, I find it very ingenious to think about what is above the sun. But I don't know if it's an anachronism. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah,
I
well,
run into raising doubts. I think raising doubts is appropriate in this
Sure.
context.
Well, I mean, if somebody draws a line and says below the sun, I mean, it's sort of natural to think, well, if he's talking about below the sun, let's get above the sun. But you're right. It's unclear what that would be. But what I'm doing is I'm comparing the above the sun to the ascent out of the cave. Okay, and there's some, and you can do that fairly because the fire inside the cave is, when they talk about that, they say it's like the sun in the sky. Okay, so we want to get beyond the fire in the cave to the real sun. So what we're seeing when we look at the sun is we're seeing an image of it. We're seeing it as if it's reflected in water, according to this. Okay, but we want to get beyond that. We want to see the real sun. The real sun is the metaphysical sun for these guys. And the metaphysical sun is sort of the light of the good, okay? And the metaphysical sun comes to you in the middle of the night when you wake up from a dream. All of a sudden,
Eureka.
all of a sudden, you've got this light bulb inside of you. You haven't had any alcohol. You haven't smoked any dope. You haven't taken any mushrooms. You haven't done anything that might cause this, and that happens. And then you might have something. You might be onto something. That's called being onto something. All right, very, very good, you guys. Listen, we're not meeting for 2 weeks. Next week is July the 4th, and July the 11th. We're on the way to Spain. So, but July the 18th, we'll meet.
Oh, you're gonna be back in
but-
Spain, that's why we're doing.
Yeah, then it's really hard for me to be here
I
if I'm
think
in Spain.
Yeah, okay.
we could parachute out.
Philosophical
Where we
difference.
live in Spain.
We
We
live,
live in a small town about 25 miles east of Malaga.
Oh.
We fly into Malaga. It's a little town we've watched grow up since the
What
70s.
region of Spain is it in?
It's Andalusia.
What is that?
Andalusia.
Andalusia.
the
Oh,
thing in the
okay,
south. Yeah.
They're the only Jews, I bet.
pretty well,
I-
pretty well.
Oh, there's so many
There's
goats.
always
So,
Jews.
yes,
In
but that part of
America.
Spain, yeah.
Yeah, I told them I was in this submarine place the other day. I saw two people and I said to my daughter, they're
The sandwich or the boat?
the same. She said, how do you know they're Jews? I said, watch. I go over and I say to him, you look familiar. I said, I belong to West Suburban. He said, oh, my mom was buried from there, but we don't belong to
No,
either
Norma, you
temple."
have,
But
you
they were
have,
Jews.
Norma, you have to be careful in this day
She
and
has a
age,
sixth sense.
offering yourself up as being Jewish.
Yeah,
Well, but I
under-
knew they were Jewish. I mean, I've seen this guy before in the
Okay.
neighborhood. He has a long ponytail and I knew he was Jewish.
She was
The
not
long
coming out.
ponytail
She
marks.
was acting in prior knowledge.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
They live across the street from the Glicks.
Oh,
Isn't that funny? They don't belong to any temple.
unattached Jews.
Yeah, they're nice people. We had nice
I know
conversation.
plenty of them. I went to music school with a lot of them.
Yeah, right.
You know, it is interesting when you mention about the music, about the artistic, but, you know, in the medieval conception of music,
It's a sign.
it's a sign, right? Because there's proper ways that sounds work together and it relates, so it relates more in that regard to a proper expression of number within the universe. But then, once society allowed people to separate themselves slightly from the proper way of thinking about everything and just be who they were, come out of the cave and, in terms of personal expression, then they could actually appreciate the art in music and say, oh, that's lovely, that's not so lovely, this is, moving, this is, depressing, whatever. Before it was just like, it's correct or it's not.
Right,
correct.
it
But-
matches the meter, but what I was thinking was like in Psalms, right? In all of that literature, in the Psalms literature, it says, make a joyful noise unto the Lord, right? With horn and timbrel and drum. I mean, there's so many references in Psalms about how to praise God using music, and the fact that David was a musician, and there's all this music. I mean, even though we don't know where that music is today, most of these psalms were set to music, and it says
Well,
so
you
in
know,
the
but
subscript, so
everybody
it
knows
was
that God
clearly
likes
used for
music,
spiritual
right?
purpose.
Everybody knows that God likes music.
Of course.
Yeah,
God
and
likes
why does
music.
God like music?
Because he gave it to us.
Well, because music comes from, you know, look at the process of being a composer. What does a composer do? Composer somehow is into what I call the musical house of God. Okay, so there's lots of houses of God. The musical house of God is where a composer goes. So he makes this ascent, or he's born like this, and he pops into the thing, and he's in the musical house of God, feeling,
Yes, the
experiencing
feeling.
with a synesthetic aspect to it. So this is not just the hearing thing. This is a seeing thing, a touch thing. Okay, so all the senses are combined when he's in the musical house of God. But he wants to bring this down. So he's ascended to that, and he wants to bring this down to the group, to the schleppers who are beneath him. And so what he does is he happens to have a whole set of tools of musical notes, and he writes beautiful, beautiful pieces. And then when guys like you and me listen to this thing intensively with you know,
Mhm.
really focus on it,
Right.
what happens is we go to the same place that he experienced it the first time. And we go to the same
When he
place that
wrote
he experienced it the first time, and we say, wow, that really moved me in strange ways. At least that's my impression of what music is. So music is something divine.
Read.
It's
I think davening is like music.
well,
Mhm.
davening is like music too. Davening is like music too.
Charles likes music. Charles.
All right.
music.
Amy,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you all.
thanks for coming.
See you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks,
Okay,
Phil.
bye-bye.